Okay, I think we're good. All right, so let's get started. Okay, so today we are going to talk about rendering and templates, this thing that I sort of hinted at from last week. And this will be the chance for us, or finally the opportunity to combine a lot of what we learned in the first half of the class with what we've been learning in this part of the class so far. So we're finally going to go back and reach into that HTML and CSS and integrate that with our Node application, with our Express application, so with all the JavaScript that we've been writing. Through this practice of using rendering and templates. So we've seen how routing allows us to bypass static web pages and send a URL request directly to our application's code. So rather than trying to pull something off of disk, it's going to grab something from our code. And we've also seen how variable routes allow the same block of code to address slightly different URLs, so URLs that have a certain pattern. So like blog posts X, where X is some ID, it'll be the same code that gets run every single time. So as with routes, we're going to want to do something similar to that with our HTML. So we're going to want to use the same HTML just as we use the same code when we're dealing with certain URLs, but we're going to want to change that HTML just a little bit. This is sort of what I was hinting at last week, right? So we're same HTML but with small differences. We can call that dynamic HTML. So we want our HTML to be slightly different rather than static or hard-coded, what exists in that public directory. Rendering and templates are what allow us to do this. So allow us to basically use the same HTML for a whole collection of routes, but make small changes to that HTML in very simple ways. So they allow us to mostly reuse static content, static HTML while injecting the content that changes. And that means that we're going to be able to run some JavaScript inside our HTML on the server prior to it getting sent to the web browser. That gives us a pretty decent amount of control over how our content gets injected into that HTML as it's being rendered. So I am pulling from our GitHub repository, of course, so the class material is up here, so it's the rendering templates class. So please, that's a reference and is exactly what I'm going on for today's lesson, this rendering.md document. And homework is up there as well, but we'll get to that later. So. Okay, so in order to understand why we want to use routes, let's first see what this problem looks like in sort of full force. Let's create a new Express application on the terminal and try to build up an HTML, bunch of HTML text inside of our Node application and see just how difficult that is, why we want to use templates instead. So in the terminal, find a directory somewhere and make a new folder. I'm going to call it HTML test, and then cd into that directory. And then start up an Express application, so you can just do Express. And as we know, it'll create everything. I get all my Express folders, and everybody can see that okay. And then open that directory in Sublime. So I'd use the supple dot shortcut, or in Sublime, open the directory, right? Look at this app.js file. We're already familiar with writing routes. So what we're going to do is we're going to write a simple route, and then we're going to generate some HTML in it. And so we already know how to write a route. We can put it in between this app.use express.static and then this direction to our routers. So I'm just going to stick it in there because this is just a hack for a temporary thing to show us the difficulty here. And the route is going to be a route for a GET request, so app.get. And then in quotes, I want to target heartbeat again, as an example that we were using before. So I always first provide the path, or the sort of URL, and then I give it the function that I want it to call back, which takes two variables, a request and a response object. And now that bit of code, whatever is in here, is going to get executed anytime somebody hits that URL, right? Everything that we were learning the last couple of lessons. And we've already seen that we can send back HTML with this send function, so res.send, the send function on the response object. And if we give it a string, so say heartbeat, that send function will wrap that up inside of some really basic HTML and send it back to the browser, right? So this is all of the code that I've written here. I'm going to move past it fairly quickly, but it's available straight off of that GitHub page. So I'm going to save that. I need to npm install to download all of the modules that this application uses. And then I can do npm start to run the application. Oh, no, I can't because I probably have one running in my other terminal. Yes, I do. Give me a second here. And now we can use npm start to start up our application. There we go. If all debugging only went so well. Now I can browse to localhost port 3000, so localhost colon 3000, and ask for, well, first I can just ask for the Express application. We know what that is. But I can ask for that heartbeat path now, heartbeat, and I just get back what looks like plain text, but is actually HTML. So like if I examine the source code, so view developer, view source, it's like, oh, I guess that did come back as plain text. All right, fantastic. So response.send, Chrome wraps the plain text up, apparently, not Node. But this is allowing us to send back a response to the browser, right? Well, what if I wanted to actually build up some HTML here rather than send back some plain text? So I want to send some HTML that my application is going to create back to the browser. And let's imagine that the HTML that I create is going to have some variables in it that depend on the URL that the person is visiting. So you know, maybe I want to change the title so it matches the URL. Can't spell heartbeat in my notes. And then maybe I want to change the body. I can't spell it up here either, so that's crazy. And then I want to change the body of the HTML to reflect maybe something I'm pulling from a database. And this is just going to be a dummy example, but imagine that that's the case, because in reality it will be, and we're going to see that in a second. And so imagine here that I actually have like a var title equals heartbeat. Golly. I don't know why I can't spell that word. Probably because it's got heart in it and I'm so cold. Var body. I'm a programmer, right? We don't have emotions. And then so var title, so it's a title for my page, and then body. This is like going to be the body that goes in my HTML. The heartbeat page is alive, and this is just examples. You know, it doesn't really matter what it is. And so now I want to build up some HTML to send back in this response. Yeah, imagining that title and body might change sometime. So how am I going to do that? Well, it's a real pain in the butt. So it's like to build proper HTML right here, I have to do, well, I have to basically string a bunch of HTML together and then insert my variables in the right place, right? So it's going to look something like this, which is a real mess. And I don't know how well my JavaScript parser is going to let me break this stuff up, but you can imagine that this is not fun. And then I have, let's see, the body, and then I have the actual body, and then I have to close the body, and then I have to close the HTML, something like that. Does that look about right? So HTML head, title, then my title value, and then close the title, close the head, open the body, insert the body, close the HTML. Yeah, right? That's what we have to do in order to make that work. So save that. Restart the server. It looks like it parses okay. Refresh the heartbeat. And did it work? I didn't send it. Thank you. Very good. So now I want to send the HTML. Good catch. Instead of that string I had there before. So kill that. Restart the server. Seems to work. Refresh the page. There we go. The heartbeat page is alive, and we can see that my HTML is actually getting sent now because I have my title and I have my body, right? So then I can go make some changes here. It's like, well, actually, let's put the body inside of a paragraph. So I can do that, and then that. Call my server and restart it. Refresh the page. Now I have a lovely paragraph, and so forth. This is basically a disaster. So imagine trying to build a Twitter Bootstrap page by stringing together a bunch of HTML inside of your JavaScript file, like that. There is no good way to do this. I assure you there is no good way to do this. You'll have 500 lines of just HTML, and then you got to figure out where to put your variables in it, and then you got to break it up so it's legible, and how are you going to do that? It's just it's a mess, right? You're just doing this huge string concatenation operation. But we still need to do something like this, right? We still want to have basically HTML that stays the same, but allows us to have variable information in it, like a title that depends maybe on the URL, or a body that changes depending on what page we're looking at. So how can we do that? Our alternative here is to take this HTML and store it in a separate file, and then provide placeholders that know how to pull out information like the title and the body and stick those values inside of the HTML. We can't put that static HTML, or we can't put these, like this template HTML, let's say it better, inside of the public directory. Why not? Be static. So I mean, like literally the server will just serve up that file if somebody requests that URL. But that's not what we want, because we still need to inject some different content in there, right? So instead, we make a folder called views, put it in there, and implement a templating system, or take advantage of a templating engine that will let us do exactly this: combine basically static HTML, but with some differences, with variables and other information that we're going to pass into it from our JavaScript application. And so then, depending on the URL that we visit, we'll grab some variables, and then we'll ask our templating engine to render that HTML page with those variables. And it'll take that content, stick it inside the HTML, output a final piece of complete HTML, and then send that back to the browser. Okay. But this is what the templating solves, is basically letting us not have to do this, which is a complete mess. Yeah. And really not sustainable programming. So let's see an example of this. Let's see a basic example of this. We are going to use a different templating engine than the one that Node provides or Express uses by default. Express uses a templating engine called Jade. If you look in this views directory here, you'll see the templates for this. And this is what a Jade template looks like. And maybe I can get some syntax highlighting here. I thought I saw Jade in there somewhere. I guess not. And I don't see, oh, I had it in my other one. So it's like, well, yeah, HTML, head, title, link, and so on. It will generate, it'll parse into HTML. The final output will be HTML, but we're not really starting with HTML anymore. We're starting with something that's quasi-HTML, kind of like HTML. Very different looking syntax, although ultimately it gets turned into HTML. Rather than learning this entire new sort of HTML language, we're going to use a much simpler templating engine that also ships with Express called EJS. So this is called Jade. This was Maiwo's suggestion. So yeah, I decided not to go with like Mustache or Hogan or one of the other ones. Like, EJS is simple enough. So. And entirely practical, because if you switch to another application framework like Ruby on Rails, it looks almost the same. So we're going to use this EJS stuff. What that means is that when we create an Express application, we need to tell it to use the EJS, which stands for Embedded JavaScript Templates. We need to tell it to use that templating engine instead of the Jade templating engine by default. And we do that. I'm going to kill my Express application here. CD out, and I'm going to make a new directory. So make dir EJS example, CD into that guy. We do that with the Express command, only this time we pass it an argument with 2 dashes, and it's the EJS argument. So express -- EJS. And what that will do is automatically modify our package.json file to include the EJS dependency instead of the Jade dependency. And then we'll set EJS to be the templating engine instead of Jade. Now, all that might still sound like Greek here, but we'll see very concretely what that means. In the meantime, this is how we're going to start up our Express applications from this point on. Express -- EJS. And in case you're already working on an Express application and want to switch to the EJS template, I have instructions for that in today's homework assignment, because you might be doing that to your previous assignment. Yeah?
So instead of saying -- EJS, can you say -E and does the exact same thing?
Does it do the same? Sweet. So we could do -E. Let's try it. Yes, and so you will see the difference here. In our views directory, we have these .EJS files. Those are like templates for this embedded JavaScript. And then our package.json file includes a reference to EJS at the very bottom here, which is the EJS dependency, so that template engine that we're using instead. Those are the 2 big differences.
So what folder does that go in?
Any folder. I just made a folder for it. So anytime we create a new Express application, we want to put it in an empty folder. but it doesn't really matter what folders it's in, right? It just has to be a new empty one. So, and I called it EJS example. So this guy right here. All right. So let's open up this directory in Sublime. We'll look at our app.js. We can see where it's setting our template engine. So at the very top, it sets the views directory as the directory for, or the views directory here as the directory for views. And then it sets the view engine to EJS, those 2 lines of code right there. And I referenced that in the homework. That's not really what's important right now. But if we look at these views files, look at this index.ejs, and we'll see, very much in contrary to that Jade file, we basically see HTML. So it's like we've taken the HTML that's going to stay the same in this template, and then we have stuff like this show up. This strange kind of tag-looking thing with the % symbol and the equal symbol, and then title. And then we close this sort of strange-looking thing with a % symbol again. We see that in 3 different places. This is the embedded JavaScript syntax that will allow us to inject dynamic content into the static HTML on the server and then send a compiled whole piece of HTML back to the browser that includes whatever content we're injecting into it. Okay? Let's see.
Is that supposed to be automatically created?
This one was automatically created. Most of the time we'll be writing this stuff ourselves.
So when you go into the Sublime,
it'll be in there, right? If you use that express-e or express-ejs to start up your application, you'll always get an index.ejs and an error.ejs file. And when do these get used? So that's like the next big question here, right? Really, the big question is, where in the world is this title thing coming from? What is this bit that's not HTML but seems to be referencing something? Where does that exist, right? If we look in our routes folder, we have our index.js file and our users.js file, right? And we know that these are routes that are being referenced from app.js. So this bit right here that we discussed the last couple of lessons, we know that this is the base path name, and that whatever shows up in routes will be added to that base path name. And so if I look at my most basic routes here, I see this response.render function instead of a response.send, which we had been using the entire time, right? And this response.render takes 2 arguments here. And I'm going to break this up a little bit so we can see it more clearly. Response.render takes 2 arguments. What's the first argument? What type of data is this thing right here?
That's your main page.
No. So just what type of data is it? Is it a Boolean? Is it a number? It's a string, right? Okay. And it is the name of the page that we want to render. And so that is corresponding to our index.ejs file here. And then what's the second argument? I broke it up. What's this guy right here in between these curly braces? What kind of data? What kind of data is that in JavaScript? It's an object. That's right. And our object, is always a set of properties and their values, or key value pairs, or name value pairs, however you want to call that. One of these properties is title, right? That is where our template is getting this title from. So the way this render function works is it will allow us to connect some value in our JavaScript, here it's express, with dynamic content inside of our static HTML, and the templating engine will know that anywhere it sees this special syntax that we're going to go over in a little bit, and a reference to some value or variable, that variable, this thing, is going to be something that we've provided on the second argument to the render function, which is this JavaScript object here, right? And don't worry, we're going to go over this in a lot more detail. I'm just sort of giving you a preview of the big picture here. So let's see this in action. I can just save this. And I can't remember if I did npm install or not. No, I didn't. So we do npm install to make sure we get all of our dependencies installed. And then I can do npm start to start up this application. And I'm just going to view the main page for localhost 3000. And it's just like it is with the J templating system, so it's the exact same HTML, except for now, everywhere that we see a reference to this title, everywhere where we see a reference to this title with this kind of strange-looking syntax here, it's been replaced with the value of title, namely express, in the object that we're passing to this function, right? So I see express, I see welcome to express, I see that the title of this page is express. So let's see this in action. Let's see how this really works in action. I'm going to quit the application, and then back in Sublime, I'm going to change this from express to express homepage. So I'm now changing the value of title that I'm sending to the template engine, to this template. Restart my application, refresh the page, and now everywhere it uses that value instead, right? All of the other HTML around it is staying exactly the same, but now wherever I make this reference to the title, it takes on whatever value I provided inside of my JavaScript code. And so again, just to reiterate, templates and rendering is how we're going to get data that changes in our application depending on the URL that the person is requesting, and get that to otherwise static HTML content that we want to embed it in so that we can render all of that and send it back to the user's browser, right? This is this whole process. Because we're going to have variable information that needs to fit inside basically static content. Any questions about that? I think rendering, I think this is not too bad. When I say that this is not too bad, really I don't think this is very crazy. When we start to look at this, the template syntax, then it'll be a little weirder. Rendering itself is pretty straightforward. Let's make some changes here to get another example of how this works. I'm going to quit my application. I'm going to pass another value to the render function. I'm in a JavaScript object, so I can just add a comma here, and then provide another property, or excuse me, another property, that's right. Let's call it the body property. And in it, I'll have another string, welcome to the Express homepage. Okay? And so now I'm providing a title and a body to the template. Template can use whatever variables it wants to. It doesn't have to use all of them. It can use one or two of them, none of them, whatever. It doesn't matter. But now, inside of this template, I have access to a body variable. So let's replace this thing here, instead of welcome to whatever, with just a reference to the body. And again, where's it getting that name from? From the object that I'm passing when I call render, giving it this index view. So let's change this a little bit. Welcome to the Express homepage. It's dynamic. Or something, right? So I'm going to save that, start up my server again, or restart it, refresh the page, and now you can see that code or that string that I've provided in the render function is now being used by that body reference inside of the template. And once again, here's the HTML code that produces that. Be really careful with the syntax. Well, this is the JavaScript code. We're going to be really careful with the syntax while we're doing it. We're going to go over the syntax in particular, but this is a strange set of symbols, although it kind of looks like an HTML tag when you think about it, like a self-containing HTML tag. But we've got these percent signs and this equal sign here, and that's critical. Right? That's how EJS knows what to do when it sees this bit of information. Okay. So we're using this function render now inside of our route callback, right? Rather than using send, which is what we had been using. So previously we'd use send. Send just sends back some plain text. Render actually calls on that view and uses whatever is inside that view. So whatever we stuck in our views folder in here with this index.ejs. And so again, just to say it once more, the render function combines dynamic data from our application with static HTML saved in a file on the server. So one which normally resides in this views folder. And then rendering is performed by the use of this render function on the response object. We'll always call the render function as part of the callback code in a route. We're not going to call render anywhere else. We might actually do something different depending on what the URL and stuff are, but we don't call render elsewhere. render will always be called as part of a routing callback. For any template you want to render, you'll need to create the template file in the views directory. So let's say I want to render a different template. I don't want to render the index template. Inside of this views folder, I need to make another template. So let's add that heartbeat route back. Let's add it right here, in fact. So I can do router.get heartbeat function request response. Okay. And I want to render a heartbeat template with, and then I pass a JavaScript object. We'll say just a body. Your application is alive, alive, and so on, right? But I haven't created the heartbeat template anywhere. I'm making a reference to the heartbeat template from my render function, but there is no heartbeat template. There is no heartbeat.ejs file in my views. So I got to create it. Let's go over to my terminal, kill my application. I'll touch views heartbeat.ejs. I can confirm, there it is, heartbeat.ejs. I'll open that up, and you know what? I'm just going to basically copy the template. Actually, let's just generate the template from Sublime, because we know we can do that. Oh no, it's an EJS file. Never mind. I'll copy the template from index.ejs. So paste it in. I'm going to hard code the title to heartbeat. Get rid of the H1 and just have a paragraph that makes a reference to the body, right? And then maybe I'll add some basic paragraph of HTML, because again, this is just HTML. Save that. Make sure that my index.js code looks good. So I'm calling response.render. When somebody visits the heartbeat path, I'm asking for the heartbeat template, which is this heartbeat.ejs file. I'm passing it a body. Inside of the template, I make a reference to my body with this special syntax, right?
Can I see index.js again?
Got it?
Yes.
All right, so everything's saved. Start up my application, view my heartbeat page, and there it is. So using now that heartbeat.ejs template with some dynamic HTML, or which is not quite the right word, some dynamic content, and then the static content that I have just embedded in that HTML file, right? Although Node, so this is how the render function works. Although Node supports many templating engines, this response.render function is always going to be the same. So whether you use Jade, whether you use EJS, whether you use Hogan or Handlebars or Mustache or whatever, there's like 24 templating engines. Response.render always works the same way. You provide the name of the template that you want to render right here without the .ejs part. And then you pass a JavaScript object as the second argument that contains the named properties that you want to be available inside that template. That is how the the render function always works. This object, this guy right here, this JavaScript object, can be as complex as we like. So we saw when we worked on some of our functions and objects and arrays that we can have nested objects, so objects inside of objects, arrays inside of objects, and so forth, right? And I include some examples in the document on GitHub, but it's stuff like this. So I could have a body, or I could actually have, say, HTML in here, and HTML is itself an object, and I reference a title, heartbeat, and then I reference the body is that, and then I also have a nav, and my nav is home, and then I also have I don't know, items, whatever that might be, and items is actually an array, and it's an array of objects, and so on, right? So this object is it's a proper JavaScript object. It can be as complex as we want, and everything inside of this object that we pass to the render function will now be available inside of our template. So our template will have access to an HTML object that itself has a title and a body. So HTML.title, HTML.body. and a nav. So just plain old nav, and then items as an array. So like items 0, items 1, items 2, and so forth. All of that stuff becomes available inside of the template from that point on. So response.render is going to work the same way no matter what templating engine we use, but the syntax for every templating engine will be different. And we're going to learn, the principles are always going to be the same. You got to inject some changing code inside of your otherwise static HTML. But what exactly that looks like and how it behaves and the kind of functionality and feature that's available is going to vary from template engine to template engine. And even though we're going to learn the general idea of how templating and rendering works, we're going to focus on syntax for this EJS templating engine. And then once you get that, it's easy to move, I think, to another templating engine. So, okay, pause for a second. Any questions? Mm-hmm.
What's the nav thing do?
Nothing. So none of this is doing anything. Like this is basically foobar. So all this is representing the fact that I can pass a complex object to the render function, just like I can any other JavaScript object. This is just a JavaScript object. So my template will decide what it wants to do with those names, with those properties. Yeah.
All that is still just only available to that /heart page.
That's right. Just that one page, right? And so what we'll see is that when we set up our routes to handle multiple types of requests, so for that homework assignment, you had that resource like a post, and there were 6 or 7 different routes that you set up. And of those, 4 of them were GET requests. A GET request is almost always going to generate HTML, if that's what it's asking for, because the browser is making it. And so each one of those requests will respond with a different template using render, so a different template and a different collection of data. And so like you'd have one of these for each of those routes inside of your posts routes file or whatever. And then likewise for comments. And in each case, you're going to provide a different subset of data to them and use a different template for dealing with that data, right?
Like adding different files, directories, if you want.
Yeah.
On a web page.
In a web page, that's right. So, and again, they just all go in your views folder. Yeah. So, and we'll talk about how to organize those. I mentioned all of that stuff in our homework assignment to get in the practice of organizing these things the right way, like putting them in the right folders and so on. And because ultimately, like once you understand Node fairly well, I think the biggest problem is like how do you organize everything in it? Nobody, I still have not. I'm still not quite sure how people organize their applications in Node yet. So. Any other questions before we move on to template syntax? Okay, so we got one side of this puzzle down. We got rendering down. We know rendering requires a template file, and that we pass in some variables that we want to be included in that template. So now, what does this actual template look like? What's up?
It's okay.
Oh.
I don't know.
We can grab Milo when he gets back. That's all right. You want to check out what Brent's got going on? Is that Mr. T drinking tea?
Yeah.
Damn. Sweet.
Sweet.
But what's your problem? What's breaking?
All right, we'll let them work on that. Well, we might pause for a second just in case, so because once we start moving into the next part, it'll be good for everybody to pay attention. Let's make sure I'm going to clean up some stuff. I'm just going to delete a few things. Yeah, go ahead and take 2 for a second.
He did not ask his question. Right? He did not phrase a question.
Okay.
2 minutes. This is not 2 minutes.
30
It's 2
seconds.
So.
Yeah, all right. For 2? Yeah, take 2 is 2. I mean, 2 is variable, right? It could be. We don't know what my units of measurement is. These kinds of specifications are important for programmers. All right. So this time that's for real. Let's look at this template. So I'm just going to focus on, get rid of my heartbeat here, for the application anyway, and focus on this index.ejs template. Close up all this other lovely stuff. Got my index.ejs template, my index here, and I know that if I visit just the base path of my application, it's going to blow up because probably my application is not running because but there we go. Yeah. What can we do with embedded JavaScript with this templating engine? So we can pass values into our template by their name on this JavaScript object. What can we do with the stuff inside that template now that we have access to those names, to that variable data? We can say, although I'm not positive myself if this terminology is correct, but let's go ahead and say that EJS, as this templating engine, embedded JavaScript, supports a number of operations. Mayo, if you have a better word for this, let me know. And the most basic operation is an insertion operation. So I want to take a piece of data that's going to change depending on this object that I pass in the render function, and I want to insert that piece of data into my page. I'm going to call it an insertion operation, for lack of a better word. And the insertion operation for EJS has this special syntax, this thing right here. So it looks like this tag. It's like a self-containing tag. So there's standard greater than and less than signs or so forth. And then a % equals, and then something. And then we close it with a % and the standard closing tag symbol. And so this looks like an HTML tag, right? But when the EJS templating engine sees this, it sees this as its own syntax and knows that at this point it needs to do something. And namely, the thing it's going to do is going to insert into our HTML document, wherever this tag appears, whatever value is being evaluated by this name inside of it. And so it's title evaluates to the value of title on that object, which is whatever it happens to be, body, and so on. But the standard format of this syntax here is less than sign, %, equal sign, name of property, and then % greater than symbol, right? Always. And that will guarantee that whatever we've got on that object, whatever value that property has, will get injected into or embedded in our HTML page. These items in here, like this title and this body, are fully fledged JavaScript objects, which means that we can execute JavaScript code on them. And so, for example, let's say I wanted to turn the title that's appearing in this H1, so this guy right here, into all uppercase letters. I have a couple of ways I could do that. I could do that from this index.js file where I have my title and I call .to uppercase on it. Great. Then this whole thing will get evaluated, and this express homepage in capital letters will get set for this title property. Or, just to show you that this is possible, I can do the exact same thing inside of my template file. So even though this is basically HTML, it also allows me to embed this JavaScript in it. EJS, embedded JavaScript, right? And then the JavaScript engine, this templating engine, will actually execute this line of code here, or evaluate it, and whatever value it gets back will be injected into the page at that point. So I'm going to save that change.
Which is better for is there a better way to go about it?
In general, you want to have as little JavaScript as possible inside of these HTML pages, and we'll discuss why that is towards the end of the class. So.
Just better put in the index.
Mostly, I would put it over here in the JavaScript. Yeah. Some JavaScript code we're going to learn is going to be unavoidable. That's the whole point of the template files. Like, we need some JavaScript in there for like looping over items, as we're going to see, or for conditional statements, like switching what HTML we decide to include based on a Boolean value. So we got to have some JavaScript in here. In general, though, we want to keep our JavaScript in our JavaScript and our HTML in our HTML. But again, I'll go into details of why that is important, or a good practice towards the end of the class, because that's an excellent question.
Well, it makes sense in terms of the same thing, same reason you don't want CSS in your HTML.
Exactly. Basically, separation of concerns. Yeah. So yes, that's exactly right. But that's called a model view controller design pattern, and we're going to learn just a little bit more about that later. So, but let me save this, restart my server, refresh my page, and boom, right? Now I have this JavaScript that gets executed inside of my HTML file. Note that no semicolon is necessary here. This is not a statement. This is an expression. So, and it's evaluating the expression, but it's not a statement. I don't think we almost ever see semicolons inside of any JavaScript inside of an EJS file. So, the insertion operation. So this guy right here, and let me just pull it out again so that we can see. When I'm talking about the insertion operation, this insertion syntax, this is what I'm talking about. That guy automatically escapes any text that we are providing it. What does that mean? So in HTML, certain characters, certain letters, certain symbols have a special meaning, have a significant meaning to HTML. One example is the less than and the greater than sign. If I want to display a less than symbol inside of my HTML, so let's say I just want to stick a less than symbol right down here, I can't do that because the less than symbol means starting a tag in HTML. The HTML parser, the thing that looks at this document and tries to understand what it wants to do, looks at this guy and goes, okay, it looks like we're starting a tag, and then it sees a bunch of white space, skips it, and then it sees another open tag. And it goes, oh, wait, you can't start a tag inside of a tag, so this is a syntax error. So how would I display a less than sign in HTML? Yeah?
Using as a string literal or using escape code?
So you can use an escape code, which is what we're going to use, or which is what HTML will often use by default. This is an escape sequence. It's a special sequence of symbols or letters, such as ampersand LT semicolon. That means show a less than symbol when you render this page, yeah, without it being a actual less than symbol start of opening tag type thing. The EJS insertion operation with this equal sign automatically does that to any text that we are inserting into our page. So let's say somebody wrote a blog post and they included a less than symbol in it because they were representing a mathematical equation. When we insert that blog post into our page, that less than symbol will be replaced with an ampersand LT semicolon escape sequence so that it correctly renders inside of the browser. Otherwise, it would actually spit out a less than symbol here, which would probably lead to a syntax error, or it can be used in a variety of attacks known as injection attacks, where people inject HTML or JavaScript into your database, and then that gets spit back out into the HTML when it renders in the web browser. What's that?
Where can you put the
Where can you put what?
injection?
So you upload it into the database through a form or something, and then when a person renders the page, if it's got code, it will execute that code inside of their web browser because it's not being escaped, because it looks like code to the browser instead of a mathematical equation. So we're not going to go into the details of that. I don't understand it all exactly myself, but it is one attack vector in web application. So, but the point is, most of the time we're going to use this equal sign. Sometimes we might, maybe rarely, sometimes, what? Sometimes we actually will want HTML to be rendered in there, right? We will want it to be interpreted as HTML. And that is to say, we don't want it to be auto-escaped, excuse me. And so we can use another kind of insertion syntax. Instead of using an equal symbol here, we use a dash by itself. And that is saying, do the exact same thing as the equal sign, insert whatever the value of body is, insert whatever the value of title is, but do not auto-escape it for me. If you see a less than sign, just put a less than sign in there. And if the browser thinks that is HTML, more power to the browser, right? There might be practical use cases for that, but primarily we're going to stick to equal signs, and in practice you almost exclusively use equal signs. So, but it's worth being aware that those are two ways of getting content into your static HTML.
I mean, would that minus sign be when you want to print HTML in the browser?
No, because if you want to print HTML in the browser, you've got to escape the HTML. Otherwise, the browser interprets it as HTML, right? If you actually want HTML to show, that's exactly why you would do auto-escaping. So if I wanted to represent a p tag, like get it displayed, I would have to do something like this. There we go, right? And then in fact, let's fill it out all the way so that we can see the difference here. I think that slash will just work there.
Okay, that looks crazy, right?
But I think that will work. I'm going to save it, and just to be safe, restart my server, refresh my page. There we go. Right? That is why we would want to escape, so that we could show those kinds of special symbols in there. So otherwise, it's just going to make it a paragraph. Cool. Any other questions? Okay, so that's the most basic EJS syntax, yeah, this insertion operation. There is definitely more complex syntax that we're going to get into, but this is a good point to take a break. So let's take 5. We're only at 6:45 right now, but that's perfect. The second half of the lesson will be a little bit longer. And if we have any free time, we're going to do pair exercises where I give you a practice problem and you work on it in class. So 5 minutes.
5 seconds?
5 minutes.
Okay.
Full on, full on.
I think the thing was, it wasn't displaying. I was getting confused. I didn't see it index for ETS here, but when I see the folder, I could find it. As you can see.
How hard is that?
Yeah.
Keep going.
Okay, so
I was- no, that's right.
Oh, well.
Yeah, what's up?
It's,
this will be just down here.
What? In my templates folder?
Yeah, or your views. That's really good. Oh wait, you didn't set it up to use these like this. You set it up to use J.
Really?
Yeah, because like when you create your XORS application, it goes to pass that -D. Did you do that?
It's actually in the views right here. It's a subfolder within the other folder.
Why do you have 2 views? That's okay. So
Good programmer?
yeah, I'm not really. Let me see something.
There it is.
Yeah, but
Because I had original Express action, I just did a subfolder.
I think okay, so
where
you're
you're
showing
going
that
is
it's not necessarily from the Express application, but within that Express application, people already have experience.
Okay.
Because they'll have done all the mistakes. I'm going to tell you all the mistakes. They'll understand the best practices. They'll know why you do things one way instead of another when you think, well, I can just do it either way, and so on. And that comes more from experience than instruction. And so I think that's mostly what you miss when you teach it to yourself. I do think it's possible to teach it to yourself. I taught it to myself. Like, ask me possible. Right? Yeah. Right.
Oh, yeah.
I think more and more.
Yeah.
For sure, right? When nobody wants to like, how do we do this? We're just gonna figure it out as we go.
was it really, like, I mean, consumers, they're not, right? There's a certain level of things.
Yeah.
Right, we're figuring it out, yeah.
It's almost like they piggyback off the nostalgia, the old stuff a little bit.
So it's basically hacking.
Well, yeah, I mean, that's the origin and the original meaning of that was the learning new cars. Someone's like trying to get something to work. There's a problem, they're trying to solve a problem. How do I make a web page? I don't know, who else? Go look at what web pages look like. That's the one. Yeah, and then you just work on it and act on it until you get something that's functional.
So did you, like, that was before, of course, the browsers that had these over content. So how did you actually see it working?
So when he,
I remember,
You could still view. I think you could still view the source code. You could use terminal utilities to download the plain text, right? Always underlying it, it's always text. In the end, it's just
he hated,
so you could still get access to the HTML that was being rendered. And then back then, there wasn't like that. There was no dynamic JavaScript. There wasn't a need to debug.
so you do rest, you have to do rather,
Like, especially if you would JavaScript update what it's going to have.
oh, yeah.
We tried to.
First, I was just around it like this,
Well,
and I couldn't get it.
So never did that.
Don't get jalapeno.
I remember
a lot of that.
like
Oh, yeah. Okay, those are pretty good. Deals. I will not buy the like the big bag because I'll be like, oh, go on pack.
I was in high school in the 90s.
I'll get like a little bag.
Have you ever had the
No,
smart
95,
food popcorn? Like the white sugar popcorn?
the JavaScript
It's the
was.
same thing, like once you open it, it's.
It's not very smart. But, you
I don't
know,
remember.
it's like
I was
it's
smart.
so bad. That's what you hate.
I mean,
But again,
Yeah.
like, I would make the same process. That was the hardest. Like, that's what everybody's doing. You always say this one about you. Pick a
That's
fence.
Okay, so then I'll go in and.
I like this. So then, see how this starts from like slash, make that slash right. Slash hard.
And then he like, you can hold it.
And also
And then very,
get,
very slowly,
get
slash
slash.
showing across
Make
the
that
string
right.
high. But you see it just
Yeah,
coming,
with the slash.
rendering very, very slow with the H, and then high, it's.
All right, and then like change that message to just like maybe express some maybe like
I always went and rode my bike and just
and then
create
create a new file.
Well,
a little bit. It's not a movie, it's just a thing. Because that thing's almost brand new.
I know, but it came out.
Copy everything from the XIP.
A lot of the stuff that I set up when I first started.
Oh,
I do that.
Really?
Yeah.
Oh, no way, that's funny. That's smart. Yeah, I know.
But then I'm at a coffee shop.
This is my mistake. Jason's
All stuff that.
no HTML.
Yeah,
Yeah, that's true.
I'm a
Yeah, but it's most cases like,
I'll tell you the shortcut. So,
the first time I was like, what?
okay, so, and then just hit
Next time, I go to.
So yeah, that's.
Is that what happens?
You
Yeah.
know what? You can't use my
That was Saturday.
computer.
Sunday, I was like,
No, for you. Alright, so save that. Now save the partnership.
When I got to
Kill your server.
they weren't even serving the thing I wanted to get. So. Oh, well.
Yeah.
Did it? That sucks.
Yeah.
What did you get?
I got the.
I know the
You can come in next
I go
time.
home and make fun of you.
Oh, yeah.
So it's fun to be like, yes, but
you don't want to drink that. You know? So I kind of like, I told them to be like, oh,
Thank you.
yeah.
like, just letting you know, if they come in
You'll be able to do that. I believe in you.
When you go home and
All right. Let's pick it up again here. Yeah.
So something I've noticed, like a couple people do, practices, they're making new project folders in other project folders.
Right.
So-
That's why it's like make them a new empty folder, not in a current project folder.
exactly. And like I've seen it also be like nested Git repositories,
Yeah,
like
yeah.
Git repository and a zip repository.
Yeah.
Like there's a couple problems like that. So maybe like clarify it and draw it out or something.
So I should make a note.
How you do?
I was already cracking the elemental learners.
Oh my God.
Yeah.
I know I mentioned this before. Okay. So Maya just pointed something out here that is worth clarifying. Because it will cause problems if you're doing this. So don't do it. So it's like Kathy had a question. Where do I put this Express folder in? So I make a folder and I'm doing my Express application, right? So it's like in the terminal, I make dir some folder icon, and then I can generate and then I call Express, right?
Was that Windows 2.1?
Draw a 3D folder.
3.1.
This is the new flat look coming to Apple Technologies, and so I call express, and it generates a bunch of files in here, right? Package.json and some other folders and so on. But where should I make this folder? So like when I call make dir, where should I put this folder? Really, the only rule is don't put it in another Express project folder, yeah? So if I want to make another Express application, I need to cd the hell out of this thing, back up to its root folder, right, which is, I don't know, projects or whatever, but notably not an Express application, right? And then make another directory, make dir, and then generate it and cd into that, and then generate another Express project, yeah? But these need to be in completely separate folders. Don't put an Express project inside of an Express project. Similarly, although in the context of this class we're only experiencing this with our Express applications, don't put a project that you have a git init command in, so like when you cd and you do git init, inside of another folder that also is a Git repository. That will lead to enormous headaches, yeah? There are submodules in Git, so you can do stuff like that, but we're not getting into that in this class. So be careful. You can put these folders inside of another project. Yeah.
But when you create your Express app for your new one, it's Express-AJS.
Yeah, right. Express-E is what we're doing now. Yeah. But in general, any command to Express should always be outside of an existing Express application. So and that will take care of some weird errors that are strange to debug if you're not aware that they're going on, especially the Git ones, because you're like, why in the world is my Git stuff not working? Okay. Cool. So just clarifying that. All right, let's look at some more advanced EJS syntax here. So let's. This is the really fun stuff. This is where we can do a bit more than just inject content into our page. There are two things that we can do. We can have conditional execution inside of our template, and we can loop over arrays inside of our template. And we're going to start with conditional execution. Remember that a conditional is just an if statement in JavaScript, right? If something, do this, something else. So when I talk about a conditional, we're just executing one block of code depending on if something is true, the condition, and executing another block of code if it's not, or we can do an if, else, and so forth, right? We can have if statements inside of our HTML using the special execution syntax, is what I'm calling it, in EJS, and it looks like this. So similar type opening and closing tags. So it's like we're opening and closing some kind of HTML tag, but there's this % sign in there. And now we do not include an equal sign or a dash. So it's just this naked sort of less than %, blah, 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 % greater than. And whatever happens inside, or whatever we put inside of this blah, 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 is JavaScript that will be interpreted by the template engine. Now, it will never output a value. It will never evaluate anything. So if you try to do something like this, that's not going to result in anything. But you can use it for JavaScript that needs to get interpreted and might control what HTML appears in the document or lets you loop over stuff. And so we're going to see an example of that case for it. So this is a silly use case, but it'll help us understand this. Let's imagine that I want to have an admin path like this. So just admin on my site that if you go to, it will tell you if you're logged in as an administrator. Okay. So I'm going to have a Boolean value that's admin, depending on whatever, and that Boolean value will either be true or false. I want to make that Boolean value available to my template, and inside the template, if the Boolean value is true, I want the HTML "you are an administrator" to appear, and if the Boolean value is false, I want the HTML "you are not an administrator" to appear. Yeah? How do we do that? So let's build it up from the beginning. I'm going to need, in my routes folder, so index.js, a router.get and this is inside of routes index.js. I'm adding a route for this admin path with my function request response. And I want to do a response.render some kind of admin page, which we haven't created yet, with a name property admin that will either be true or false. And for now, we'll just say that it's true, right? And so my router is going to respond to admin. It's going to render some template called admin, and inside of that template, there will be a property or name variable admin that will either be true or false. So now we need to create the admin template. Let's see what happens if we don't create the admin template so that we know. Start up my application, visit admin, failed to look up view admin in views directory. That should be pretty helpful. If we see that error, that means admin.views directory. Okay, fair enough. Did that blow out my application? No, just an internal server error. So let me kill it anyway. Oop. In my views folder, I'm going to touch views admin.ejs. And I'm doing all of this from the root directory, right? You could cd into views and make it as long as the file shows up in views. And we can see this in Sublime. My views directory now has this admin.ejs. Great. This is going to be some kind of HTML template. It's probably going to look a lot like our index. You know, we always have doc type, HTML head, and so on. So I'm just going to copy this for now. Paste it in there. The title will always be admin check. This H1 will be, I don't know, check, whatever. And then I want to have some HTML appear here. But I want my HTML to vary. In some cases, I want it to say, you are an administrator. But in other cases, I want it to say, you are not an administrator. And what do we have to work with? We have this admin value that is either true or false, or this admin variable that's true or false. So I can refer to that inside of this code using this EJS execution syntax, right? But I don't want to output the value of this thing. I don't care. I don't want the user to see 0 or 1 or true or false or whatever. I want them to see this. And so I can build a conditional inside of this execution syntax, which is just a JavaScript. I'm literally making a JavaScript if expression, right? So I say if admin open curly braces, yeah? So that's just an if in JavaScript. But if this value is true, I want it to show this HTML. Now, this is an if statement. And if I want to have a properly coded if statement, I need to close the curly braces. And that is definitely weird. I totally agree. But once you get your head wrapped around, yeah, I'm taking a statement like this that is mostly JavaScript, but I need to get HTML in there somewhere, yeah? And so, or otherwise speaking, I have some HTML, but I need to get some JavaScript in there somewhere. And to blend this properly, we use this EJS syntax, this execution syntax, which is like the other ones, but with no equal sign or anything. Open up my if statement, conditionally include some HTML if that variable is true, admin, and then make sure that I close my if statement. Yeah. Well, this is an if-else statement, so really I need an if-else here. And then again, if I'm in my else block, show this guy. But now, of course, I've got to close the else side of this thing like that. Yeah, gnarly, right? So look at that for a second there. Make sure that that's clear what's going on there. Kind of looks ugly. This is maybe one of the reasons why we try to keep JavaScript outside of these files. Starts to get ugly pretty fast. But sometimes it'll be necessary. Sometimes you're going to need like a conditional inside of your HTML for whatever reason, and this is how you do it. So let's save this. This is my template. My template's in the right place. Let's save my index.js file. It looks like it's good. And again, if you're missing this, it's all inside of our class document. Thank you. Oop, that's not there. That's bad. So save it. I'm going to restart my server. view my admin page. And because my variable is set to true, it says you are an administrator. Perfect. Let's set it to false. So over here, I looked up something else, and it says you're not an administrator. You're not logged in as an administrator or whatever, so I restart my server. Check it now, and it says you are not an administrator. So I get to conditionally decide what HTML is included in the page based on values in the JavaScript, right? And that's pretty cool.
So where would the conditionals be?
So in this case, and for a point of like showing that this is possible, it's actually inside of this EJS file. It's like blended in with my HTML like that.
But I guess what would the, with an if else, if the code is, if the user puts.
Oh, I mean, it could be anything, right?
I mean, but where would that go? Which I'm asking you, I guess, which folder you would find that the condition, the actual conditions to determine whether or not.
Oh, whether they're an admin, right? Right. This can only be an example. Like probably we check a session cookie and get the user's login name and then run that against a database to see if they're actually an administrator. But I mean, that's way beyond the scope of this lesson. So imagine really what's going on here is that there's like this var admin equals something really complex, right? And then we pass the result of whatever that complex operation is to this JavaScript object. But what has happening there, we might cover some of that stuff by the time the class ends, because that's sessions and cookie management, which is really important for web development. But it'll depend on our time. So, but yeah, right. There's obviously a lot more going on in the background. So. For right now, does this does this check here make sense? As gnarly as that syntax is, does that make sense?
I have a question actually.
Yeah.
How would we tell if a user is an admin or not based on each individual computer when they're accessing?
So that's, again, way beyond the scope of the current class.
That's even beyond my question.
There's no way we can get into that right now. So because we just got, right now, we got to start with baby steps, right? And so right now that means figuring out how we do this rendering with templates. But hopefully we will get to being able to check that kind of stuff, again, using something called sessions and cookies. And then checking against a login database. So, because ultimately that's where we need to go, right? If we're building a blog, we don't want people to be able to edit our blog if they're not an administrator. Makes sense. So, okay. But again, let's break this up here. Inside of this execution syntax, that's where I put my JavaScript. And then, conditionally, based on the result of evaluating that bit of JavaScript, I can have HTML be included or not in the page. And then I need to close that if statement, so I need some more JavaScript inside this execution syntax, but this is a more complex if-else statement, so I open up my else. If the original check is false, then the else will get included in the file, and then again, I need to close my curly braces. And really the one rule about this kind of weird-looking syntax is that two rules maybe. One, I'm just writing normal JavaScript. This is normal JavaScript, if admin curly braces. This is not like some special subset of JavaScript. It's actually JavaScript, embedded JavaScript. The templating engine knows what to do with that. Two, anytime I have JavaScript that I want to include in my template that needs to get executed or evaluated, must go inside of this strange-looking syntax, yeah? If it's JavaScript, stick it inside of that. And then it makes sense that you have these weird, like, stray curly braces and stuff. That's really the gist of that whole rule. I don't think it's too bad. Looks weird, not nearly as bad as it could be. So, of course, it is pretty gnarly, and there are other templating engines that make it way easier to do this kind of stuff and don't look nearly as bad. But EJS is easy to start with because it's mostly HTML. So, and again, any JavaScript code, always, forever, needs to go inside these guys. But know that this will never include actual JavaScript data in your page, yeah? I cannot say something like admin name if I had a variable called admin name and expect it to see whatever the name is in the page. For that, I must use this with the equal sign, right? If I actually want to include the value of that variable in the page. This is only for executing some JavaScript. Clear? So we did all that. Wow, blew through that right there. I knew where it was going. Okay. Cool. Does that make sense? Any questions about that?
So, like, on the client side, they request this page. Like, none of that stuff shows up in the generated
That's right.
HTML.
Right. In the end, all they ever see is the result of running all of this embedded JavaScript with this. That's right. So you can use EJS actually on the client side. So, but that would be under different conditions. Yeah. In our case, all of this stuff is getting executed on the server, and they just get back plain HTML. So cool. Any other questions about this? Yeah.
Where'd you find the, like angle bracket percent minus? Where'd you find documentation on that? Because that's like not anywhere.
I was a tutorial. I had to look at a tutorial.
Yeah. It differentiates between like the equals to render HTML and then dropping that to render JavaScript.
Okay.
But it doesn't say anything about like minus. I know it's like part of it.
It's part of it. Yeah. No, the documentation's not very good, frankly. Unfortunately.
I think it said it was incomplete.
Is incomplete.
Oh no, actually, never mind. I was looking at Jake.
Because I picked it up from the documentation I was just looking at was the examples on the GitHub repository, which is really lightweight. And then there's the embedded JavaScript homepage.
Yeah, I've checked all of that.
Not in there.
I checked the Google.
Yeah. No, it was a tutorial. So I'm surprised that the documentation was so sparse on it. So, but fortunately, it's basically HTML syntax. It's not too bad. You go look up ERB. Because it's basically ERB. ERB is a similar templating style with similar syntax and engine for Ruby on Rails. So if you move to Ruby on Rails, their default engine would look very similar. You'd just be able, you'd know what to do right away in terms of writing their HTML like this. So. All right. So what's the other cool thing that we can do with this? In addition to being able to, and let me show you real quick before we get into looping. What if I did want to have some kind of special JavaScript value here? So obviously I'm conditional on this admin variable. I put some bit of HTML or another. But inside of each of these, I could also have one of these injection operations or insertion operations and reference, whatever, the admin message, yeah? And then if I had passed an admin message inside that object, it'll get rendered there, yeah? So the condition is just checking the condition. What we do inside the conditions block can be anything. So it can be HTML, or it can be more EJS, or it can be a combination, or whatever, right? Doesn't matter. And so forth, yeah? So this stuff can get really complex.
Go back to the index.js. Admin message. So that's a little easier.
Yeah, that'd be a little easier, right? So you could, I mean, there's reasons for and against doing that. So you might think, well, why do I want to break on my condition in here, and then change whatever the HTML is? What if I had that get set inside of my index.js file and then just showed whatever the message was? Harder to localize. So localization is when you provide different translations of your content depending on the locality of the person viewing your page. So like I want French, German, Spanish, Arabic, Chinese, and so forth. This string right now is hard-coded into my JavaScript. So that's hard to change. But this guy is just an HTML page that's a view, and I could have multiple copies of it depending on what region they're from, and then make sure that I get the right page from the browser indication of what language they're speaking. So, and that's easier to do with HTML than it is inside of the JavaScript. So that's called localization. But again, that's beyond the scope of the class. So. But that would be why you would want to have the conditional there. Cool. Okay, so the other awesome thing that we can do with this kind of execution syntax in EJS is loop through data. So imagine that I have we're going to use an example for this. So imagine that I've got like the front page to a blog, and I have the top 10 posts. And so they visit posts index.html, and I hit my database for the top 10 posts, get those back as an array. It's an array of JavaScript objects, so we should be comfortable with that. And then I want to loop through that array, and for each of those posts, show the title, and then a summary and a link to the post, because that's what they're going to see when they show up on my front page, right? Well, how can I do that if this is my templating engine? I have this loop. I need to have a single block of HTML get repeated over and over, depending on what's in that array. I can't really do that from the server, side JavaScript, from like index.js, but I can do it inside of my template pretty easily. So you'll recall, so I'm going to kill this here. Actually, that's for the admin, so why not? We'll keep it and make another one. The for each function on an array. So let's say this is JavaScript, even though it's not. But let's say it's JavaScript and I have var posts equals some full array of stuff. Yeah, got a big array. And I want to iterate over this array. We've seen one way to do looping. We can say for var I equals 0, I is less than post.length, I plus plus, and then var post equals posts at I. Yeah, and that will give me each post in turn, and I can do whatever I want with it. Well, we learned about higher order functions. One of those is for each. On the posts array, so remember it's an object, it has functions on it, there is a for each function. And our for each function is a higher order function, so it takes a function itself with one callback, our parameter, that is the item in turn for each element in this array. Something with that item, and we might call it post because it's actually a post. Yeah. And so remember when, as part of our practice for higher order functions, we abstracted the for loop and made a for each function that did that for us. That's what's going on here. This is basically a for var I equals 0 to whatever, I plus plus, et cetera, but then sending posts into it one at a time, so we don't have to worry about all that syntax. So they're going to learn how to embed this inside of our JavaScript template so that we can iterate over a post, and then in between it, have a new block of HTML generated for each post. That's what we want to do. Yeah. Let's see how we can do that. Let me go ahead and create a new template. So I don't want to blow up my admin. Maybe I like my admin. And I'm going to go to my terminal, kill the application. Inside of my views directory, posts.ejs. Remember, all we're doing is putting posts.ejs inside of views. I look over here, there it is, post.ejs, fantastic. I'm going to have a template that's going to be similar to all my other templates, so let me go ahead and copy one of them. It'll be called posts. And then something is going to happen in here. We just don't know yet exactly what that will be, right? But I do know that somewhere on my server, I'm going to have a route for posts. Let's just call it that. Actually, let's call it posts index.html. That will need to generate a response. And then somewhere in here, I'm going to have an array of posts that I pull back from my database. And I want to pass that to my template. Okay? So I can say response.render. I want to render the posts template. Again, that corresponds to our post.ejs file. And I want to pass in a JavaScript object that has the posts. So we start to get a little loquacious here, but does that make sense? Rendering posts, post.ejs, passing in whatever variable or whatever value is in this variable post to the JavaScript object posts, so that in our template file, posts is going to be available to use somehow. We just haven't determined yet. And let's go ahead and check and make sure that this is all working okay. So that my rendering or my routing is working, so that's the path I want. Should generate this, and this should just show up with a post title but nothing else, because that won't actually evaluate to anything. So I can restart my server or start it back up. Posts index.html, and that's about what I would expect to get, right? Obviously, I don't have anything in posts. But let's go ahead and give ourselves some dummy data. So imagine that we had a blog post. It's an array of objects. Okay, so we're going to have JavaScript objects in this array. I'll do 3. But you can imagine you hit your database for 10 of these, right? And each of these post objects is going to have a title. Say an author. Oop, and I shouldn't use an equal sign there, right? It should be a colon. And then a body. And you can imagine our body would be some lorem ipsum or whatever. So again, just objects inside of an array of objects. Yeah, shouldn't.
Comments.
What's that?
Comments at the end of each.
With commas at the end of each one. Yeah. So, and then separating each of these, and then there as well. But this is just standard objects and arrays. So, and if we actually hit a database for this kind of stuff, this is how it's going to come back. We are actually going to have an array of objects. So when we get to the section on using data, this is how we're going to get it. So this is very practical. So I have 3. Let's see, using templates with EJS, and then maybe, I don't know, whatever, optimizing our code. Doesn't matter. This is just dummy data. Yeah. But now, since we've set our post variable to that and we're passing it over to here, inside of our template, we have access to this array of objects. And what I want to do is loop through this array, and for each of those objects, I want to output some HTML. So I want to say maybe H3, I want to output the post's title, so the post.title. You can imagine if I had access to that post variable. And then I want to output the post's author. So again, I'm using this insertion syntax here, right? Because I actually want that to appear in my page. Post.author. And then the body. Oop. And again, title, author, body are coming from the fact that we have title, author, body on these posts. But I don't actually have a post thing anywhere. I have posts. How do we get to the individual post inside of this array one at a time so that this bit of code appears for each post? Yeah. For each loop, right. So in my execution bit of EJS, I can say posts.forEach. My forEach function is a higher order function, so it itself takes an anonymous function as a callback. And in turn, it's going to pass post, or each item in this array, one at a time, to this bit of code. But this is a function call with an embedded function in it, so I'm going to have some weird-looking syntax. That looks something like this. So let's look at this line by line. This is the JavaScript that I want to get executed, but that does not output anything. All I'm doing is calling a forEach function on my posts array variable, which comes from the fact that I'm sending it to the render with the render function down here. ForEach will loop through each item in posts, calling this callback function one time for each one of them, and it will pass in the one that it's currently looking at. This was that higher order function that we actually wrote that does this. This guy here is an anonymous inline function. So let me break it up into actual JavaScript. If this were just plain old JavaScript, it would look like this, right? So I need to open up that curly braces. This bit right here is what shows up on that line here. And then for each one of those posts, insert a bit of HTML into the page. So I can have the HTML tag that I want, and then the insertion syntax for the post.title, post.author, and post.body. But then I need to close the call to this function and the anonymous inline function parameter that I pass it. That's this bit of syntax here, except for I don't think I actually need the semicolon. So I don't know, Mo, do you know? Yeah, me neither, right? So I don't ever see them inside of the EJS. We'll just leave it off. but it's basically that line showing up to close this bit of syntax. So remember, as crazy as this looks, what we've got is some JavaScript surrounding some HTML, or otherwise some HTML that's got some JavaScript around it, depending on which perspective you want to take, how you want to look at it.
I'm sorry, is that last post for each, is that closing it, or is that just?
No, this is just was example. Yeah, right, just an example. I mean, that's what this looks like if it's just plain JavaScript. Yeah. This is what it looks like embedded in here with all the strange syntax. So let's save that. Restart my server. And now when I do this, for each one of those posts, that block of HTML is going to get injected into my page or rendered into my page before it's sent out to the browser. And for each one of those posts, I make reference to a header, an H3, a span, and a paragraph. And then inside each one of those, I get to use that injection syntax to actually set the value from that post object in the array, right? That's pretty powerful. So that's pretty cool too. So this is how we can like loop over things inside of a template and generate a whole bunch of HTML. Because imagine doing this with like 100 posts with, you know, this much code, basically, right? We'll do that for every single one of those posts. You know, if the database pulls back 4, it's going to show 4. 5, it's going to show 5, and so on. Whoa. That's pretty cool. Let's pause. Any questions about that?
Can you go back to that?
Yeah, I know the syntax looks gnarly. You can add spacing, because remember, HTML doesn't really care so much about the spacing.
But there wouldn't be a semicolon.
No. Just sort of clean it up like how it looks. You can always put stuff on new lines so that you can really see the structure of the page. Like that. Use as much white space as you need for it to make sense for you. But move in the direction of, you know, compact readability as a general practice. But I think that sort of, you know, really makes clear, insofar as it makes, you know, it's clear at all what's going on here. So yeah.
What's the span tag do again?
It's the most generic inline tag element in HTML. So it doesn't actually do anything, but it lets me wrap some HTML up in a tag and then reference that tag by class or ID. So, but it doesn't have any effect on how it's rendered unless I give it CSS styling.
Pretty amazing stuff, but it doesn't save. I mean, it saves time, but then you just have to have the elements.
You guys still got to write this, absolutely, right? I think other templating engines.
Damn.
Other templating engines aren't so gnarly, yeah. But let's see why this is magical, yeah. Let's make this awesome in like 2 seconds. So we have, and this leads very nicely into this idea of MVC, of Model View Controller. Let's say I actually wrote code that accesses the database, grab these posts, and make them available to the template. That's the code that I've got inside this index.js file, this stuff. I don't need to change that now. And so if I want to radically redesign what my site looks like, I don't have to touch this file. I don't have to do anything to this file. The only thing I need to change is the template itself. Right now it's pretty basic. Let's add some Twitter Bootstrap to it in like 30 seconds. So I'm going to go over to the Twitter Bootstrap page. Make sure it's just getbootstrap.com. Look at their getting started. We know that they have a basic template, so I'm going to grab that. First, let me pull out what I want to save. So this is the reference to the posts. So I need that every time, so I'm going to pull that out, stick it at the bottom temporarily. I'm going to grab the Twitter Bootstrap template and replace my static HTML with it. Okay? But I don't want hello world to show up in my body. I want a div class equals container. And then now I want to show all of my posts inside of this container, like that. Okay, whoop. But we already know that the Twitter Bootstrap styling doesn't work because we haven't downloaded it to our server. Twitter Bootstrap provides an easy workaround. Instead of referencing the files on the server, I can reference the Bootstrap CDN files, which are links that exist on the web that I can just use instead of files on my server. So here's the latest compiled and minified CSS. I can copy that, and I can replace this link to a local CSS with server CSS, so somebody else's server. And then the latest and minified JavaScript, I can grab that, replace the reference to the JavaScript. That is down right here. Okay, great. Otherwise, this thing stayed the same. Yeah, and I haven't touched my other file, but I'll go ahead and restart my server. Refresh my page. Now it's been Twitter bootified, bootstrappified, right? Hard to tell, but I could maybe grab the navbar example from, I suppose, components. And I'm just going to be, the brutal copy-paste approach, just to demonstrate the fact that this works. Stick that thing up here above my container, as gnarly as that all is, but I'm just going to forget about it for now. Restart my server to be safe. Now I have that, right? So, and I don't have to touch any of my server code. We haven't gotten to the point where we already have database access and all of that. But if we did, it sure is nice that we don't have to mess with any of that just to change what our site looks like. Yeah. And then you could stick this inside of a table. You could have alternating row colors. I mean, there's a million different things you can do now using all of those Twitter Bootstrap classes and styles that we previously learned about. So even though we're generating super basic HTML, it's up to you how awesome you want that HTML to look. Yeah, it's up to your aesthetic sense to style it however you want. So that practice of separating the code in our router, this code here, the code that hits our database, and the database itself is separate from that, from the code in our view, and only relating them, only making them dependent upon each other as little as possible. As little as possible. So the only thing that this view, the only assumption this view makes about the code inside of my router is that it's going to provide this posts variable. That's the only assumption that this view makes, this template makes. This practice of having separate parts of our application for what we call the views, for what we might call the controller, which is how the router is functioning, and what we might call the model, which is what's coming back from the database, is known as the MVC, or Model View Controller Architectural Design Pattern. It is a practice for organizing your code. It's a best practice for organizing your code. And it gets right to the heart of what Kevin was saying earlier with this decoupling. It's the same reason that we don't want to mix our CSS in with our HTML. We want to separate out concerns of our application so that it's easy to change one part of it without having to change anything in another part. That way we can have a designer come in and just work on some awesome HTML while our server people are working on some cool database stuff, while our back-end guys are making sure that everything else works, and they won't clobber each other's contributions every time they change something. Because the dependencies between those three different parts, the model, the view, and the controller, are as little as possible, as loose as possible. That's also known as loose coupling.
What was it called? The model architecture?
So the MVC, Model View Controller. Very standard design practice in modern software development, and an excellent way to organize your application. There are many variations on this theme, but they all do basically the same thing of keeping your code as little dependent on each other as possible. Yeah. In general, the model refers to the core data stuff that you're working with. Like we have posts, and our posts have authors, titles, and bodies. We're going to talk about modeling in our next lesson, and then we're going to learn about databases next week. Then you have your views, which is what appears in the user interface. So in this case, it's the HTML that gets rendered and sent to the browser. But in a normal application, it's all this stuff right here. And then you have the controller, which is the part of your application that is responsible for mediating between the model and the view. And so the controller, handles an incoming route for us, or URL request, gets the data that it needs just for that URL request, and then passes that to the view and asks the view to render itself. And then when somebody submits a form from the web browser or from the view, that submit request is going to hit another route, which is the controller, and then the controller will probably update the database, so make necessary changes to the model. Excuse me. Again, mediating between the view and the database. That's usually the function of a controller.
So what you change for model view controller has a cool little
yes.
chart for it. right there on the right.
Okay. And we will design our applications to follow that pattern. Because if you go and move to another web application environment like Ruby on Rails or Django or even a number of PHP frameworks, they are all a model view controller or a model view controller-like. They all try to organize their code in similar ways. And so you'll see, and in fact for our homework assignment, we've got our views directory, which we can think of as our views. We've got our routes directory, which we can think of as our controller. We will also have a models directory where we're going to stick everything that is related to our data modeling. And then using the node module system, require, and so on, we'll be able to get these files to communicate with one another as we need them to. That is part of your homework assignment. Before I hit the homework assignment up here real quick, I want to mention a couple of other things that EJS does that we didn't talk about. There are 2 more bits of really awesome advanced functionality that we haven't gone over. That you are feel free to look at, be aware of, and employ in your applications if you would like. I'm getting these things from the EJS page on GitHub. So if I do EJS GitHub, search like that, or hell, even if I just search for EJS, GitHub is the second thing that comes up. Vision Media EJS. He has sort of a very, very straightforward reference here that's like, here's how you do these things. There are filters, which allow us to apply really neat transformations to data inside of the HTML without having to write JavaScript. It's pretty advanced, so we didn't get into that, but feel free to have a look at it. And then there are includes, or layouts, which we also did not talk about, but complicate the sort of appearance of our, or the coding and templating that we have to do a little bit more, where I can partition out my HTML into separate files. And then when I render one of those files, that file can reference other HTML files and pull in their static content or dynamic content into it. And the example they have here is pretty good. Like, let's say I need my body to change, but my header is always going to look the same and my footer is always going to look the same, no matter what page I'm doing. So rather than repeating myself and having to copy-paste the header and footer inside of every template file that I make, I have one file for the header, one file for the footer, and then in all of those template pages, I reference them with an include statement, and then I change my body. That's a much better way of organizing your templates, but a little more advanced, and I didn't want to confuse anything else that we're already doing with EJS, but worth being aware of. So, yeah. So templating is awesome. It's probably one of the things that enables modern web development to happen as quickly as it does, for sure. Otherwise, you're stringing together a bunch of HTML and JavaScript, which is not very fun. Let's look at the homework assignment so that it's clear what we're doing. This is on our GitHub page. Somewhere around here. Here we go. Okay, coders. Rendering templates homework. Lesson 13 homework. You're going to extend the application that you began building 2 lessons ago. So for our 11th lesson on Monday last week, where you created a bunch of routes for posts and comments. For this assignment, I want you to add rendering, add views, add templates and rendering for all of the posts routes that are GET requests. Because GET requests will typically generate HTML. As I talk about that here, if you want to start a new project from scratch, this is how you do it, with express.EJS and so on. And then you can copy in the routing code that you wrote for the previous lesson. If you want to upgrade an existing material or existing repository that you've got to use the EJS stuff instead of Jade, you have to make some modifications. These are the modifications that you make, so just follow the instructions, whichever one are relevant to you. And then for these 4 routes out of the 6 or 7 that you originally wrote for this assignment, for these 4, you're going to create templates, refer to some data that I've included in this repository, and render that data inside of the templates as your response. So right now, if you've done the assignment, you should have a bunch of res.send calls with your placeholder HTML. Replace those with res.render, response.render. Reference the correct template file. You'll have to create that, and then pass in the right bit of data that you'll need according to this description. So like get posts will display a list of all posts, so you need to give it all the posts. Getting a particular post displays a specific post, so you should only give it one post, right? And then inside of that template file, generate or create the right kind of EJS syntax to show that information according to whatever style that you like. But you should employ Twitter Bootstrap, stick everything in a container, just like I did in that example. Here are references to that class material. You need some data to work with, so I've included that in this repository. I've added a post.js file that just contains a bunch of dummy data, which you can access by requiring it into your route file. When you require it in, you get two functions and all in a find. You can grab all of the posts by saying var post equals post.all. So if you require this in properly like that. And then you can get a particular post from, say, an ID in the parameter list from your URL request with a post.find ID. Yeah, and it'll pull out that post. And this will give you access to the data that you're ultimately going to want to render by writing your own EJS templates. If this is not all done for Wednesday, that's okay. This will be a continuing part of your homework assignment for Wednesday. And we'll just keep on building on these homework assignments. So don't, if you're rushed because I know we only have really one day before Wednesday, that's okay. You know, maybe have a look at it, review the material, and then you'll have the whole rest of the week to work on it. So, and then upload your changes to Heroku. So let's make sure we're getting this stuff pushed out onto the internet so you know it looks real. Pause. Are there questions about anything? Can be homework, can be class material, anything we've gone over today, anything that we've gone over previously.
That EJS reference you showed, is that on the GitHub?
Yes, it is. So there's, oh yes, so if you look at our, the class assignment here, so the class repository and then rendering MD, EJS GitHub page and references. So, yeah. Yeah.
If everything's done, I created a fake API server. So if you want to replace that, database that you have in there with this, just to show them what like a database call would look like. Request module.
Yeah. Cool. Wait. Well, do they have to be running like Mongo or something on their machines, or?
No. Like this is just for like in between the two of us right now. I'm gonna present to the database. I already created it.
Okay.
So like you can make requests to it right now.
Cool. So how would they use that from in their code?
So you can do it right now if you want.
Okay.
All right. So the request module is like.
Oh, right. Like on the HTTP or something, right?
You just make a request to my IP address at /API/.
Let's see. I mean, that would take me a second to whip up. You believe in me? I do that up here. I want to see if there's any other questions though. So, but I think that'd be sweet. I'm going to add that to the repository. You should send me the IP address, and maybe I can work up a sample code, or if you want to, because I get what. So yeah, use the request object, but we can stick that up there, and you can see what it's actually like to use an API server.
Where did you find the layout section in the EJS GitHub?
It's almost at the very bottom. So
it's just in the.
It's under layouts. Okay. So right there.
Okay.
Almost at the very bottom. Okay. Cool. Other questions? Keep them coming. We got a second here.
Last week you mentioned a JavaScript user group.
Yes.
It's tomorrow.
Tomorrow. Sweet.
11:30.
Free pizza. I think it's for people who are at work.
I have it on my.
So. No.
Where's it at?
I believe it's at Prototech.
So it's at Prototech.
Yeah. It is.
You guys go to it?
I go.
I've been a few times. They're usually pretty good. So let's look at there. So OKCJS, okcjs.com or org. I don't remember. Here we go. Oh yes, in fact I know the gentleman who's speaking, Carl Kirch, talking about the event loop. So that thing that I very briefly put on the board is a circle with some arrows in it. Like exactly how does that work? Carl's going to talk about that. So it's like how asynchronous functions work in JavaScript, why those callbacks work the way they do, kind of what's really going on there. That'll be his topic. And then it'll be people hanging out and eating pizza and talking about JavaScript stuff and whatever else. But yeah, tomorrow, 11:30 at Prototech. It's good. There's like 80 people there or something. It's crazy. So.
80 people in that room?
I get not 80.
60
No, it's still a ton. Oh yeah. No, it's a bunch. No. It's a lot of people.
They move all the tables and stuff. It's just chairs in there.
Want to try this thing?
Yeah, sure.
That'd be awesome. So go to request, Mikhail request.
Do what?
Like just look for his module request, and that's it.
Whose module?
Michael.
Whoa. I like that. Like.
Okay, just look on
Golly.
Wait, look on where?
like npm.
npm. Oh, okay.
Request module. It's called request.
Oh, this is not a built-in one, huh?
Yeah. It makes making HTTP call easier.
Way easier. Yeah.
Yep. So scroll down. Like the first example block of code is all you're going to need.
This guy right here.
Yeah.
Cool. And then what do they get back in the body? A bunch of JSON?
Yeah, I'm returning JSON.
So it should automatically stick that into a JavaScript object. Yeah. Right. So check it out. I would put your name in here, but I know I'm going to misspell it, so I'll call you M example.
You could have done Mr. T. That would
Oh,
Mr.
snap!
Sweet Tea.
I'm doing that. Yeah, that's just sweet tea. It's a badass shirt, man. I love tea, and who doesn't love Mr. T? Okay. So what did I do? I made an empty directory, not in a project. I created an Express application.
Do you have the one that you just had like a second ago, where you like made that?
Oh yeah, I guess we could do it in that. Huh?
Use that.
Oh. Now we're not going to use Mr. T. What are we? What is it? EJS example? Yeah. Okay, so I'm still in there, and that's what's still open here. So let's do index. Let's make a route. Let's call it test.
So that one right that you have right there, I can just...
Okay. Then I need to npm install the request module. I'm saving it, so this is how we install modules, right? And then save them to our package.json file. So there's all the requests. I require it in at the top. Okay, and then if I still have that code in there, I can now, oh, I already got that. So what do I want to request?
So my IP address, which is 192.168.1, and then 197.
Okay.
And then API/JSON. Wait, sorry, API/people. And that would be like anybody.
So body should be people. Okay. Let's go ahead and yeah. So I'll do that, and then I'll go ahead and do response.render people. Oh, I don't need a function here. I need a JavaScript object. I want my people to be my people. Else should be an error. How do I pass it on to an error from a router? Can I call? I can't call next, can I? If I just want it to be an error, can I throw an error?
Skip error checking.
Yeah. Well, so it should work. Okay. I like what every programmer secretly wants to do, and what every administrator is like, no, dude, seriously, you need to check for errors. Okay. And so then what am I doing? I'm making a request to the server, to the API people. I should get back a JavaScript object of people. And then I'm going to log that just to be safe. And then I want a response.render people, which means I need a people.ejs view file.
You can just use the other one you have. I have all the same fields, like a title and author.
Okay, so I'll just render posts. Okay, but this time I'm passing it. I still need the post variable because that's what I refer to, and now it's people, right? The difference makes sense. I'm going to save all of that. This is at my test URL, so I should be able to restart my server, see if this works, and go to my web page here, localhost at test. Come on, little guy. I'm not getting an error, but it's not seeming to do it.
Is your firewall on?
Huh?
No, I'm just kidding.
You get the IP address right? Wait. Oh no, that's still the same stuff. Try it one more time. Oh wait, because that's index. What was it? Test? No love.
So if you hit it, I should see a console log. I'm not in the console. Oh, no, I broke it.
No, yeah, Postman doesn't show up either. So, and so this is why. So I introduced this tool Postman a few lessons ago, right? So it's like, so we have, so let's say we've got this code. Maiwa's got a server running. I've got something that's hitting a server. It isn't working. It's like, well, which part's not working? How can we figure out which part's not working? What's this process of debugging? Well, the first question that you can ask is it my code or is it his code? We can't tell. So I can take my code out of the picture by hitting his server directly, and if it doesn't work when I hit his server directly, that would suggest that it was his server. So
just put his IP address.
yeah, but API people, I'm still not getting a response. You getting a response?
Yeah, I should have said it. Oh, sorry. That's it with Postman.
Does it work with your Postman?
Yep.
Is it because you're on another computer? Oh, because you're at a different port.
Oh yeah, I forgot. Yeah.
1337.
Yeah.
Boom.
There we go.
All right. Okay, so I'm on a different port, 1337. So I have to fix the port number. Now, I'm going to restart my server. This should work, because I always saw that it works in Postman. So, unless my code is broken, which is possible. And, whoa, my code is way broken. Post.forEach, let's see, title, author, body, has no method for each. So it looks like it's coming back as a string literal instead of getting parsed into a JavaScript object.
Oh, I'm returning an array of objects. Isn't that what you're expecting?
Yeah, but it's getting, but this guy right here is actually a string, not it's raw JSON. It's not getting parsed automatically. Are you sending it back as .json?
No.
So when you do response to our dot whatever, or
I'm just saying response.send.
no, do response.json, and you can still pass it an array. Yeah, because then the application content type will get set, and I bet you the request will figure out that it's actually JSON.
All right, good.
Let's try that. Nope, still there. Does it come back as JSON? Hit that guy. That looks better. JSON, raw. Where's my headers? No, I still don't see. There, try it one more time. No love, no love. So let's do this. Do you remember how do I parse it? Is it JSON.parse?
Yeah.
So people, JSON.parse people. Yeah, because I'm getting a raw string back. It's not automatically encoding it. There we go.
Whoa. There we go.
There we go.
There we go.
I just created like fake objects in like a fake database.
Okay. Cool. So now we've got a server that's, imagine like so I've got my server running. I actually have a server. My server is talking to his server, which is actually running the database, which is how you wouldn't really set this up in a production environment. Your database would be on a different machine. The database sends back some data over the network. The guy, the web browser, is still waiting for all that to finish, right? My server gets those results back in this people thing, parses them. We haven't learned about what JSON is yet, but we will. Parses them into an actual JavaScript object and then passes that back into my render function, which finally gets rendered into HTML and sent back to the browser, right? And all of that happens in milliseconds. Yeah.
You wouldn't normally do that over Wi-Fi.
Oh no, right? You'd be on the same yeah. You'd be like two machines that are right next to each other, physically as well, or at least on the same, probably network. I don't know how Amazon sets those things up, but they're super fast, right? So cool. That's wild.
So
feel
could
like
you,
that should be in
could you
process.
push yours?
Hey.
Yeah. After I put up like real data, I just did this like
2
if you
seconds.
refresh that, I'm gonna like it's live, so like everything's
So, and again, like, and check it out how callbacks are being used in here, right? So when I set up my router, I have to provide a callback function because nobody's hitting that URL yet. And then when somebody does finally hit that URL, I make a request. But this request is going to take time to complete. It doesn't execute immediately. So I pass my own callback function to that request, this guy here, this whole stuff callback function, so that when this request finishes being executed, and we're just making an HTTP request as well, so it's like I've got a fake browser that's hitting his server is generating text and sending it back to me. When that is finally finished, this callback function gets executed, and then inside this callback function, inside another callback function, I finally actually render my page with response.render, and then our templating system kicks in, right? So. And so it's like, well, I mean, should I be impressed? Holy moly, the things that are happening under the hood to make this possible in like 10 lines of JavaScript code is insane. Yeah, I mean, we're making stable network connections over the freaking air with validation at the hardware level. We're sending data over it, and then we're getting that information back, and then we're rendering it in another few lines of HTML. And I can do all of this with JavaScript, and it's barely any effort. Like, once you're comfortable working with this stuff, and you get the environment and you get the language, this is why it is worth spending time figuring this stuff out. Because, I mean, you could just make stuff in like a day. And not even trivial stuff. Like, seriously, you work on a thing for a day and you build an application, or the beginning of an application. Yeah.
30 hours.
30 hours. Yeah, right, exactly, yeah. So, and that's true now as much as it was then, yeah. You just have to, you get good at it, you practice it. So.
Wow. 30 hours. Yeah, or less. Yeah.
Cool. Any questions to close it up?
Oh, that was sweet.
Yeah.
Yeah, that was awesome.
So it's getting, like you say, we're getting good. So tomorrow, I will probably go over the homework in any case, and then we're going to talk about modeling.
Wednesday, right?
Wednesday, thank you. Yes. So we're going to talk about modeling. Modeling is the process of thinking about the world and how we want to represent it inside of our code. So like a blog, what's a blog post? What composes a blog post? What kind of data does it have? And then how do we relate these kinds of things to each other? We're not actually going to get into the database part yet. We're going to actually look at databases next week. But understanding modeling is a sort of a precursor to understanding databases. So, and it's not anything crazy or special. It's surprisingly straightforward. But it's a kind of way of thinking about things. So, yeah.
One last thing, I just found this today. A friend of mine was asking me how to get something going. It's called Google Web Fundamentals.
Okay.
And like so yeah, they released it, and it's like a guide of how to build a site, like from start to finish. And they have their own little bootstrap thing, but like it's really well done. I like it. Great for beginners. Nice.
I wonder if this came out of their I/O, because they put out that materials design thing as well. That's really nice too.
They announced it, I believe, but it was already sitting there.
So this stuff is gold. Like, seriously, if you can learn best practices from somebody else rather than 10 years of practice, yeah. So, okay, sweet. I'm not going to do office hours on Wednesday. I have some other things that I got to take care of. But Wednesday will be another a more lightweight lesson, and then we'll spend some time in class doing practice exercises as well, so we can get a little bit of this pair programming thing and work together and do some group exercise. So, all right, guys, thanks. Yeah. Oh, we're